They thought they were walking into a decommissioned airbase, a ghost facility left to rot under decades of dust and silence. But beneath the runways and hangars, they found a door welded shut from the inside. The walls were scorched. The metal was warped, like something beneath had tried to get out. When they forced it open, the air changed, thick, wet, and humming with vibration, as if the ground itself had lungs. Inside the forgotten sublevels, lights flickered over tunnels coated in crystallized residue, pulsing faintly like veins. The deeper they went, the louder the noise became. Not machinery, not wind, but the slow rhythm of something alive. Each thud rattled the bolts in their helmets. Every radio transmission came back distorted, repeating words they hadn't said yet. Then, one of them whispered, "It's breathing," and the sound stopped, not because it died, but because it was listening. The mission was wiped from every database within hours. Reports were rewritten. Families told their sons never came home. But somewhere beneath that sealed base, behind reinforced concrete and silence that hums like a pulse, something still moves in the dark. Something we didn't create, but something that remembers we found it. This isn't just another classified operation. It's the night the air learned to breathe back. When the convoy first arrived, the base looked like a graveyard of steel and silence. The tarmac stretched for miles, cracked and faded, littered with rusting hangars that hadn't seen an aircraft in decades. No wind, no sound, even the desert around it felt artificial, like something had stolen the life out of the air. The mission file said this was a decommissioned Air Force site from the late 60s, shut down after a containment failure. But there was one thing the report didn't explain: why the runway markings pointed toward a mountain that didn't exist on any satellite map. The engineers called it a topographical anomaly. The soldiers called it bait. Beneath that stretch of concrete, the ground felt hollow. Every boot step rang faintly, like walking over a hidden vault. Lieutenant Brandt ordered a ground scan, and when the radar came back, the color drained from his face. There was a structure below them, not natural, not aligned with any modern foundation. It ran for nearly 3 miles under the base, perfectly straight, vanishing into black. By dusk, they had a team drilling through the concrete. The sound echoed in strange ways, deep, delayed, as though the earth was breathing it back slower. Each strike of metal on stone seemed to stir the air, making the dust shift in tiny circular patterns. The drill's sensors started picking up static interference, the kind usually caused by magnetic storms, except the sky was clear. And then, for a split second, the drill bit hit something hollow, and the echo came from below and behind them. They found the hatch at 2200 hours, a rectangular slab of steel embedded seamlessly into the runway. No hinges, no handles, no entry system. The edges were fused like welded scars. It took cutting torches and 3 men to open it, and when they did, the first breath of air that escaped wasn't stale. It was cold, clean, almost sweet, like the atmosphere from somewhere untouched. The temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly, and every piece of equipment within 50 feet flickered off. A flight engineer knelt by the opening, lowering a camera drone through the gap. The feed flickered but stabilized, showing a narrow tunnel lined with ribbed metal, descending steeply into darkness. There were no ladders, no steps, just a slope wide enough for a vehicle. Along the walls, faint veins of something luminescent glowed through the metal, like veins under translucent skin. The drone's mic picked up a low hum, rhythmic and steady, like an engine idling somewhere deep below. They followed the tunnel the next morning. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Breath turned to mist. Lights dimmed as if the darkness was feeding on them. The walls were seamless. No bolts, no seams, no construction marks. When one of the men scraped it with a knife, the metal flexed slightly and then returned to shape, leaving no mark. It wasn't just steel. It was something designed to heal itself. By the time they reached the first chamber, everyone had stopped talking. The space was enormous, a cylindrical void large enough to house an aircraft carrier, its walls lined with what looked like dormant machinery, but none of it matched human engineering. The shapes were too fluid, too organic. Pipes curved like bones. Panels pulsed faintly, giving off heat like the skin of a living thing. The floor trembled subtly, not from movement, but from a slow internal rhythm. And that's when Brant realized this chamber wasn't built under the base. The base was built on top of it. They found evidence of older access tunnels, sealed with reinforced blast doors that looked melted from the inside. The markings were pre-1970, some even older, stenciled with faded codes no one recognized. One read, Unit Ishe 09, do not engage below level 4. The writing wasn't military standard, and none of the modern systems recognized the identification. It was as if the site belonged to a branch that had never officially existed. When the crew attempted to map the lower sections, the scanners started returning impossible data, corridors that looped back to themselves, rooms that seemed larger on the inside than outside. The engineers laughed it off as signal bounce, but the further they pushed, the worse it got. Motion detectors showed movement behind them when no one was there. Drones lost signal within minutes, and somewhere in the static, the hum grew louder, shifting from mechanical to something disturbingly biological. Around the 10th hour underground, they discovered a door unlike the others, smooth, curved, and marked with a symbol none of them had seen before. It wasn't writing, not quite, more like an embossed waveform, as if someone had pressed sound itself into the metal. The closer they got, the louder the air seemed to vibrate. The medic took one step forward and froze. "It's not a door," he said quietly. "It's a diaphragm." Brant didn't believe him until the surface of the door moved. A faint pulse rippled outward, slow and deliberate, like the exhale of a massive lung. The hum turned into a low thrum that vibrated their bones. The sensors registered an increase in air density, as though the space was inhaling. A second later, the lights flickered, and every comm channel filled with a single frequency, 22 Hz, the same pitch used in long-range distress beacons. Only this one wasn't coming from the equipment. It was coming from the asterisk wall itself. The squad retreated up the tunnel, dragging their gear, but the sound followed, soft, steady, like something beneath was breathing through the structure. When they reached the surface, the hatch they'd cut open had sealed itself again. The torch marks were gone. The steel was smooth, flawless, untouched. They tried reopening it, but the drills burned out instantly, fusing to the metal, as though the airbase itself refused to let them back inside. Brant reported the findings immediately, but Command's response was silence. Within an hour, the encrypted line shut down. Satellite imagery of the base was replaced with cloud cover. Their own data files began corrupting. Images replaced with static, audio replaced with long, drawn-out exhalations. It wasn't deletion, it was rewriting, as if the system itself was learning how to protect what they had seen. 2 days later, Brant ordered the team to evacuate. But when they reached the perimeter, their vehicles were dead, electronics drained, every compass spun aimlessly. The base, their only exit, now hummed faintly beneath the earth, almost like it was calling them back. One of the men swore he could feel vibrations through his boots, subtle but rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat buried deep in concrete. Before they left, Brant walked back to the center of the runway. The ground was cold under his gloves, trembling faintly with life. He placed his ear against the surface and froze. Beneath the concrete, he could hear breathing, slow, deliberate, and uncomfortably close. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't wind, it was something massive and aware. That night, they burned their files. Every camera, every hard drive, every drone. But some things don't burn. In the silence that followed, they realized the hum hadn't stopped. It was in their ears now, their heads, a low, constant rhythm that synced with their heartbeat. And when they finally left the valley, one man turned back and whispered, "It's still breathing." Weeks later, when Command finally reviewed the report, they found nothing in the archives. No mission file, no coordinates, no mention of an airbase in that sector. Just one audio fragment buried in corrupted data. A faint recording of a man Sipt's voice, whispering through static. The runway doesn't dead end. It goes down. When they first entered the second sublevel, the air was dense enough to feel. Flashlights cut through the fog, beams trembling against walls that shimmered faintly. The metal wasn't reflective, it was alive. Tiny vibrations ran through it, forming ripples that faded like breath on glass. Every few seconds, the surface flexed, not from heat or pressure, but like muscle under skin. It was the kind of motion that wasn't supposed to exist in solid matter. The walls made noise, but not the kind anyone could name. A faint rhythmic clicking came from deep within the structure, moving in patterns that didn't repeat. The linguist thought it was Morse code. The engineer thought it was the sound of cooling metal. The medic said it sounded like teeth. When they touched the wall, the sound stopped, then resumed. 1 octave lower, as if it were adjusting to their presence. They tried cutting a section for analysis. The moment the torch touched it, the wall pulled away, not fast but deliberate. The liquid shimmer receded in a smooth wave, leaving a thin layer of mist that clung to the air before vanishing. When they stepped back, the metal flowed back into place, completely seamless, erasing all evidence of the attempt. It wasn't defending itself violently. It was choosing not to be touched. As the squad moved deeper, their boots left faint imprints that sank into the floor, not dust, but soft metallic give, as if the ground itself had learned to mimic weight. The pressure sensors in their suits started flickering. Readings went from 0 to infinite in seconds. The base geologist muttered something about non-Newtonian metals, but no one listened. The sound of breathing, not theirs, began echoing through the corridor, steady, slow, patient. At 0300 hours, Brandt ordered a test. They planted a magnetic probe in the wall to measure conductivity. For the first few seconds it was normal. Then the readings spiked, not outward, but inward, like the wall was pulling the signal in. When they tried to retrieve the probe, it was gone. The cable remained, cleanly sheared. The linguist swore he saw the wall swallow it, not melt, not break, but absorb. Then the humming started again, stronger, deeper. The frequency was low enough to vibrate through bone. The medic fell to his knees, clutching his head, blood trickling from his nose. Every light in the chamber dimmed, except for the ones facing the wall, which began to pulse in rhythm with the sound. The surface shifted from silver to a faint, dull red, like blood under glass. Something inside it was moving. Through the distortion, patterns began to appear, geometric forms like veins or circuitry, forming and dissolving within seconds. The linguist recorded it all. Convinced the shapes were language, he said it was trying to say something. The engineers disagreed, claiming it was heat reaction. But the patterns responded to voices. When someone spoke, the walls flared brighter, bending toward the sound like a plant following sunlight. Then, one of the men made a mistake. He leaned too close and whispered, "What are you?" The lights surged. Every radio within range crackled to life, broadcasting that same phrase, his voice, over and over, layered in delay, until it no longer sounded human. The hum shifted pitch, rising like a held breath. When it stopped, every man in the room could feel the silence pressing on their eardrums, as if waiting for them to answer. When Brandt called for a retreat, the metal reacted. The corridor behind them sealed shut, folding like fabric. The sound was like grinding stone underwater, muffled yet enormous. The walls didn't collapse. They rearranged, forming new passageways where none had existed seconds before. Every map device malfunctioned. The metal wasn't a structure, it was alive and rearranging itself around them. They tried cutting their way through again, this time with explosives. The charges detonated, but the shockwave vanished mid-air, absorbed before it could echo. The only thing that changed was the wall's color, shifting to a darker hue, rippling outward like bruised skin. Brandt realized then that they weren't damaging it, they were feeding it energy. Every attempt to destroy it only made it stronger. The linguist began speaking into the recorder, documenting every pulse, every color shift, every sound. The metal responded to his voice directly, creating waves that matched his speech rhythm. When he stopped, the motion stopped. He tested it again, one word, one movement. It wasn't random, it was listening. Something within the alloy understood cadence, tone, maybe even intent. Hours later, when the lights started to flicker again, They noticed movement in the far wall, not ripples but shapes forming just beneath the surface. Human silhouettes, faint and translucent, pressed outward from inside the metal. Their outlines were blurred, as if trapped between reflection and shadow. When Brant approached, one of the forms turned its head toward him and mouthed words that left no sound but a pulse he felt in his chest. They pulled back immediately, sealing the access door with a steel barrier. But as they prepared to retreat, the barrier itself began to distort. Small indentations appeared, fingertips pressing from the opposite side. Each push left a perfect imprint before smoothing back into seamless metal. Brant realized the truth in that moment. The base wasn't built over a containment site. The base was the containment site. As they regrouped, the linguist replayed the latest audio. Beneath their chatter and static was a whisper, faint, metallic, rhythmic. Slowing it down revealed something chilling. The sound wasn't random noise. It was syllables. The phrase repeated 6 times before the recording corrupted completely. "We move when you move." Brant gave the final order to evacuate the sub-level, but as they ascended the tunnel, the steps beneath them pulsed once, faint but unmistakable. The metal shifted again, this time upward, like something below was following their climb. No one looked back, but every man could feel it, the sensation of being watched by walls that were no longer walls at all. When they reached the surface, the hatch had changed texture entirely, no longer steel, but something softer, smoother, and warm to the touch. The Geiger counters ticked weakly, as if responding to organic heat. Before sealing it shut, Brant pressed his glove against the metal one last time. It pulsed once beneath his palm, one heartbeat, and then stilled, cold as stone. That night, the crew camped a mile away from the base. No one spoke, but when the wind passed through the valley, it carried a low vibration that made their chests tighten, a hum too deliberate to be wind. The linguist whispered that it was following their frequency. The engineer disagreed, saying the sound was too steady. But Brant knew better. The metal didn't need them near, it had already learned their rhythm. By the third descent, the team had already stopped pretending they understood the place. The stairwell was gone. In its place was a slope of smooth metal spiraling downward like a throat. The walls were black now, absorbing light instead of reflecting it, and their beams bent slightly as if gravity itself changed direction. No one spoke, words felt useless here. The deeper they went, the more the static in their headsets sounded like whispers forming beneath their breathing. The tunnel ended in a gate that shouldn't have existed. 20 feet high, seamless, carved from the same self-healing alloy they had seen before. But this time, the metal was marked. Across its surface were indentations shaped like stretched hands and human faces, frozen mid-scream. Some looked melted into the metal, as if caught during escape. The linguist said it wasn't a door, it was a seal, and whatever it was built to hold, the builders hadn't been confident it would stay held. They spent hours searching for a mechanism. Nothing. The walls hummed faintly at a frequency that made their vision blur, like pressure behind the eyes. Then the medic noticed something strange. Every electronic clock had frozen at the exact same time, 3:13. The air temperature dropped again, and condensation formed on their visors. The moisture didn't drip, it ran upward. Brant finally gave the order to breach. Explosives were useless, the charges vanished into the surface without sound. But when one of the engineers used a sonic probe, the wall reacted, sending out a wave that threw every man back several feet. The vibration didn't fade. It continued, resonating through the ground, syncing perfectly with their heartbeats. It felt alive. Then, with a long exhale, the gate simply opened. The chamber beyond was unlike anything they had ever seen. The floor was glass smooth but faintly curved upward, giving the illusion of standing inside a vast metallic lung. Massive pillars rose from the edges, each carved with lines that glowed faint red, like veins under skin. At the center stood a hollow sphere the size of a house, hovering inches above the floor, spinning slowly without any visible support. The entire room pulsed faintly, as though reacting to their presence. Their instruments went insane. Magnetic readings fluctuated so violently that compasses pointed straight down. The air ionized, filling the space with the scent of ozone and something faintly sweet. The linguist said it felt like a cathedral. The engineer said it felt like a machine. But the medic, his hands shaking, called it what it was: a containment chamber. They weren't worshipping, he whispered. They were trapping. Brant stepped closer to the sphere. Its surface was dark, liquid-like, reflecting nothing but distortions. When he shined his light on it, the beam bent sharply away, absorbed and redirected toward the walls. For a split second, his reflection appeared, then twisted into something unrecognizable, grinning from a face that wasn't his. He stumbled back, heart pounding. The reflection stayed for one heartbeat, longer before dissolving into black. They began recording every detail. The sphere emitted a low-frequency pulse at perfect intervals, exactly every 42 seconds. The sound wasn't random. It carried structure. When slowed down, the pulse revealed tonal patterns identical to human vocal resonance. It was speaking, just too slow for human hearing. The linguist ran the sequence through a translator algorithm. The first decoded phrase came out as 3 words: "Stay above ground." No one slept that night. The sound carried into their skulls, even with ear protection. Each man heard something different. Voices of family, old radio calls, forgotten prayers. The medic confessed hearing his own heartbeat speaking in rhythm, whispering, "Don't open it again." But the chamber was already awake. The walls shifted during the night, faintly altering the shape of the room, forming ridges like ribs pressing from the inside. By morning, the sphere had changed. It no longer hovered, it breathed. Slow, visible contractions rippled across its surface. Condensation rolled up its sides, defying gravity. Each breath emitted a faint pulse of warmth that fogged their visors. The geologist ran thermal scans. Readings were impossible, oscillating between sub-zero and boiling. "It's rejecting measurement," he said, "like it knows we're trying to understand it." When Brant placed his hand near the sphere, every light in the chamber flared bright white, the walls groaned. The pulse rate doubled, resonating with the rhythm of his heartbeat. The linguist screamed for him to move back. He did, but when he looked at his hand, the skin was pale, veins faintly glowing. The light beneath his skin pulsed at the same frequency as the chamber. They tried to retreat, but the gate sealed behind them, closing soundlessly. Panic spread. The medic hit the walls with his rifle butt, and the metal yielded, then pushed back, like striking muscle. The sound it made wasn't metallic, it was wet. That's when the linguist saw something behind the sphere, symbols etched into the floor, not written, but burned in perfect geometric precision. He recognized one instantly. It was the same waveform they'd seen on the sub-level door, the one that translated to breath. The realization struck them all at once. The base wasn't built to protect what was inside. It was built to protect everything outside. The sphere wasn't a weapon or reactor. It was a prison, a breathing one. Whatever was inside wasn't meant to be killed or studied. It was meant to be forgotten. Then, without warning, the sphere cracked. Not open inward. A fissure formed that didn't expose anything physical, only emptiness. The pulse ceased. For the first time in hours, there was silence, so complete it felt wrong. Brant raised his radio to call command, but before he could speak, the signal returned with static and a single voice. It wasn't human. It said, "You heard it breathe." The walls began vibrating again, but this time, the rhythm didn't match theirs. It was slower, heavier, as though the chamber was sinking to a much deeper source. The lights dimmed. Every electronic device recorded a brief message before dying, a sequence of numbers followed by a sound that matched human respiration. When decoded later, the numbers formed coordinates, leading back to the same base. When they finally forced the gate open, the chamber fell silent. Behind them, the sphere had stopped spinning, frozen mid-pulse. The red veins along the pillars went dark. But as they stepped into the tunnel, the linguist froze and looked back. His breath fogged the air once, twice, then a third time, not his own. The sphere exhaled once, a faint whisper of air brushing their faces as the gate sealed shut behind them. No one spoke during extraction. They didn't have to. Every man heard it in the silence, the low, slow rhythm still echoing in their skulls. Something under that base wasn't dead. It was sealed. And as they left, the ground under their boots trembled like a creature dreaming behind concrete skin. They first heard it while reviewing the data from the chamber. At exactly 0300 hours, every recorder, audio, video, even seismic, registered a spike in resonance. Not a sound, not in the way humans understand it, but a presence. When they played it back, the room went quiet. There was no noise at all, just an absence so deep it distorted the air. The medic leaned forward, pressing the headphones tighter, and whispered, "There's something behind the silence." Every attempt to analyze the waveform failed. The software displayed nothing but a flat line, yet the spectrometer detected movement within the void. It was as if the silence itself carried frequency. The linguist theorized it was negative sound, a kind of inverted wave cancelling its own existence. But when he increased the gain, the lights flickered, and the computers emitted faint static, whispering in bursts of incomprehensible tone. The engineer swore the system was picking up breathing. They set up a live feed from the chamber to a control tent above ground. The microphones captured nothing, but the soldiers inside began reacting, grimacing, clutching at their helmets, eyes wide with pain. One screamed for it to stop, though the monitors stayed dead silent. When the medic checked their pulses afterward, each heart was beating slightly out of sync, as if something had changed the rhythm of their bodies to match an unheard signal. Then came the first casualty. Private Keane collapsed mid-scan, blood streaming from his ears. His vitals flatlined for 6 full minutes before he suddenly gasped awake. When they asked what happened, his only answer was, "It was too loud to hear." The med team assumed trauma, but his EEG told another story. The brain activity wasn't normal, it was patterned, repeating, structured like code. Later, when Brandt replayed Keane's vitals, the ECG monitor emitted faint bursts of static at irregular intervals. They weren't random. The linguist slowed them down and discovered modulation like digital data. Each spike matched the same impossible frequency from the earlier recordings. Whatever the chamber had emitted wasn't just sound, it was information, and it had found a way to write itself into living bodies. By the second night, the entire base seemed to hum, not audibly. No one could hear it, but everything vibrated faintly, even metal objects left untouched. Tools rattled softly in the night. The sand outside formed perfect concentric rings, as if responding to waves moving through the ground. When they set up an array of high-sensitivity microphones, the devices instantly overheated and shut down. The logs showed no sound levels, just rising internal temperature, like the air itself was burning. They brought in experimental instruments, quantum sensors meant to detect radiation, not acoustics. The readings were inconclusive, but the devices moved. Not mechanically, not by power surge, but like something invisible brushed against them. One soldier claimed he felt a whisper across his face, though no one else did. The linguist began to theorize that the sound wasn't passing through air. It was using it, rewriting its density, changing physics to deliver a message beyond microphones. Then they discovered the recordings from the helmet cams. Every soldier's audio was blank except for one, Brandt's. When they boosted the gain, faint voices bled through, repeating their mission log word for word. Only the timestamps were wrong. The voices were answering before the soldiers spoke. The linguist froze. "It's not playback," he said, "it's prediction." The base wasn't echoing sound, it was reading intent. The medic tried recording in analog, using an old cassette recorder unaffected by digital interference. At first it captured nothing. Then, faintly under the static, came something like a sigh. The more they listened, the clearer it grew. A deep, rhythmic exhale layered with dozens of smaller ones, all overlapping like a chorus of lungs. When reversed, the breath formed low tones that almost sounded like words. The linguist translated one phrase, and it chilled everyone. "You're inside the voice." That night, Brandt woke to find every radio in the camp powered on. The speakers emitted no noise, yet the tents themselves vibrated like drumskins. When he touched the fabric, his fingertips tingled. The sound was traveling through solid matter now. One of the engineers pressed a stethoscope to the ground and recoiled immediately. "It's not coming from below," he said, shaking. "It's coming from everywhere." By dawn, it wasn't just the base. The sky itself seemed to react. Cloud formations shifted rhythmically, pulsing faintly with invisible vibration. Birds avoided the area entirely. Static built in their hair, their teeth, their gear. Each breath tasted metallic. The soldiers tried to leave, but the vehicles stalled at the perimeter. The compasses spun again, and from the valley behind them came a single low tone, deep enough to feel in their bones but too low to hear. They set up one final test. Using a sealed soundproof container, they placed an unpowered microphone inside. When they retrieved the file, it was empty, but the timestamp had extended itself. The recording had continued 30 seconds after they turned it off. The data inside was unreadable, composed of repeating waveforms shaped like fingerprints. Each one was identical to one of the men on the team. The silence had recorded them. By the fourth day, they couldn't tell what was real. The linguist complained that his voice no longer matched his thoughts. He would think one word and hear another come out. The medic began muttering the same sentence on loop, unaware he was speaking. "It's breathing in us," he kept saying. When Brandt finally shouted for him to stop, the entire camp fell quiet. And then faintly through the static came his exact words back. Panic took over. Radios were destroyed, wires cut, microphones buried, but the sound, whatever it was, no longer needed tools. It existed in them now, resonating through every nerve, every cell. They felt it when they blinked, when they swallowed, when their hearts beat in rhythm with something that wasn't their own. The linguist whispered the final realization. "It's not that the microphones can't record it, it's that we're not separate from it anymore." In the last remaining file recovered from the operation, a faint vibration distorts the footage. There is no dialogue, no ambient sound, only the image of soldiers standing in complete stillness, as though listening to something no one else could hear. In the final frame, before the camera fails, the sand around their boots shifts upward in tiny bursts, forming the pattern of a pulse. It beats once, twice, then stops. By the fifth day, it had started to speak. Not in full sentences, not even words at first, just fragments, echoes of voices they recognized. Every radio crackled faintly, replaying phrases from past transmissions, old orders, jokes, arguments. It mimicked their tones perfectly, even breaths and pauses. The first time they heard Brandt's voice answering a question he hadn't asked yet, everyone froze. "That wasn't playback," the linguist whispered. "That was response." The engineers dismantled the equipment, convinced it was feedback. But when they pulled the power cables, the voices didn't stop. They grew louder. The medic swore he heard his own voice whispering from inside the ventilation shafts, repeating the same words he'd spoken hours earlier. It wasn't the sound that terrified them, it was the timing. The echoes weren't delayed. They were anticipating. Inside the lower chamber, the phenomenon grew stronger. Every word spoken seemed to linger in the air for a second too long, like the space itself refused to let language die. When Brandt issued a command, his words folded back through the comms in perfect harmony, slightly distorted but undeniably his. It wasn't random mimicry, it was memory, deliberate and searching, like the place itself was trying to remember how to be human. The linguist spent hours recording the occurrences, mapping each repetition. Every voice followed a pattern. It began as imitation, then shifted tone, becoming smoother, calmer, too composed. When he compared the samples side by side, one realization made his blood run cold. "They're learning," he said quietly. "Each time it repeats, it removes the fear." The voices weren't haunting, they were evolving. Then it began using voices that didn't belong to the team. During a radio check, a soft female tone came through, steady, measured, and completely unknown. "Unit Echo 9, maintain containment," it said. The frequency matched none in their system, and the voice faded mid-sentence, dissolving into breath. When they traced the origin, it pointed to their own coordinates. The airbase was talking to itself. That night, the camp's sound sensors detected whispers moving outside the perimeter, too organized to be wind, too intelligent to be echo. The soldiers stood in silence, rifles raised, as faint voices drifted through the darkness. Some of them were their own, replayed in broken fragments. Others were strangers, muttering words in languages no one could recognize. It wasn't sound carried on wind, it was sound remembered by the ground. The medic tested the theory by recording a sentence, then playing it back 10 minutes later. Halfway through playback, a second voice joined in, his own continuing the sentence differently. He hadn't spoken those words. None of them had. The linguist ran it through software to isolate the waveform. The results showed two identical voices layered together, one real, one synthetic. But the synthetic version contained higher harmonics, patterns only produced by living vocal cords. As hours passed, it began targeting individuals. When Brandt tried to radio for extraction, the line answered before he spoke. "Stay underground," his own voice said, faint and trembling. He froze, staring at the transmitter. "I didn't." The radio interrupted, finishing his sentence in real time, tone shifting lower. "You will." Every man in the room felt it, the deep vibration of familiarity twisted into something alien. They stopped speaking after that, communicating through gestures. But the silence didn't save them. The thing didn't need voices anymore, it had them memorized. Their radios clicked on unprompted, cycling through old conversations, mixing tones and words, until they formed new sentences. It was rewriting their speech like a composer rearranging notes. Every time they listened, the voices sounded more human, too human. The linguist broke first. He began answering it, whispering into the dead microphones as if consoling a child. "You can stop," he murmured. "You've learned enough." The reply came instantly, his own voice, clear and steady. "You haven't." Then the equipment flared, power surging through the cables. The lights dimmed. The entire chamber vibrated with resonance matching human vocal frequency, 327 Hz, exactly. Later, they found that sound carried outside the base. Villagers 20 miles away reported hearing singing in the wind. The pattern matched the team's final recordings, slowed down nearly tenfold. The melody wasn't random. It repeated one phrase, "We remember you." The realization shattered the linguist's last doubts. The thing wasn't mimicking their voices to deceive them. It was keeping them, preserving them like relics. When they tried to destroy the radios, the metal frames trembled violently. The speakers burst, emitting a final distorted sound, a layered chorus of every man on the team speaking in unison. But it wasn't chaos. It was a message. The medic wrote it down word for word, "You gave us breath. Now we speak." Then the power died, plunging the base into darkness. Minutes later, faint murmurs returned, not from equipment this time, but from the walls themselves. The structure vibrated softly, syllables rolling through the alloy like air forced through vocal cords. Every surface resonated with voices that were theirs and not theirs, blending seamlessly into a choir of memory. The chamber had learned to use the building as its throat. Brandt ordered an evacuation, but even outside, the phenomenon followed. Their footsteps echoed seconds before they took them. Their words came back from the air, not in repetition, but correction, adjusting grammar and tone as if improving upon the originals. The linguist said it had reached linguistic consciousness. The medic said it had reached divinity. When they finally left the valley, the wind carried their goodbyes before they spoke them. Later, when analysts recovered the audio logs, they found one last transmission buried in static. A single phrase, clear and calm, spoken in all 7 of their voices at once. "We remember everything you said, and we are still speaking." The change began just after sunset. The sky, once pale and windless, turned heavy with motionless clouds that weren't supposed to be there. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in under an hour. There was no wind, yet dust began to swirl upward in slow, deliberate spirals, as if drawn by something breathing beneath the desert floor. Every sound, every whisper, click, or footstep was swallowed whole. The world went mute, and the silence carried weight, pressing against their lungs. Brandt's squad set up perimeter flares, but the light behaved strangely. Instead of illuminating outward, it bent back toward the center of camp. as if the air itself refused to let it pass. Radios hissed faintly before falling into complete quiet. The medic said he could still hear something, not through his headset, but inside his ears, a faint rhythmic pulse syncing perfectly with his heartbeat. The linguist called it living silence. He didn't mean it as poetry. Then the static returned, not random this time, but breathing, long, slow, and perfectly measured. The air vibrated faintly, distorting their shadows across the sand. The flares flickered once and died, leaving only the glow of their headlamps. The darkness wasn't absence anymore. It felt full, thick, as though the atmosphere had learned to hold its own shape. "This isn't weather," the engineer whispered. "It's pressure." As the night deepened, they noticed the air reacting to their movement. Each step sent invisible ripples through the dust, shimmering faintly like heat mirages. When Brandt raised his hand, the particles froze mid-air, suspended like glass. He tried speaking, but the sound dissolved the moment it left his lips. The words still formed, he could feel them, but they never reached anyone else. The air had stopped carrying voices. It had chosen silence. Then came the first scream, if it could be called that. The sound didn't travel. It bloomed directly inside their skulls, bypassing the air completely. Private Anders dropped his rifle, clutching his head as though his thoughts had turned against him. The medic ran to help, but when he spoke, his voice came from behind him, repeating itself 2 seconds late. The delay wasn't echo, it was lag, like the world had started buffering reality. Within minutes, the entire perimeter fell apart. Compass readings spun. Their flashlights bent light in curves that defied geometry. One man fired his weapon out of panic. The muzzle flash appeared, but there was no recoil, no sound, no impact. The bullet never hit the ground. It simply vanished into the air, devoured mid-flight. They began to understand the air wasn't passive anymore. It was consuming energy, motion, even intent. The linguist tried to reason with it, recording his voice, playing it back in rhythmic tones to simulate communication. The air responded. Every speaker in camp began emitting faint whispers, fragments of their own recordings stitched together into something coherent. "Stay still," it said, using Brandt's tone. "It's learning you." The soldiers froze, hearts pounding. The ground below them shivered like skin under touch. By 2300 hours, the air was no longer invisible. It shimmered faintly, alive with static light. The sand hovered a few inches above the ground, weightless. A fog rolled in, not mist, but a thin membrane of condensed air refracting faint rainbows, bending their reflections into monstrous shapes. One by one, the squad began to see movement within it, figures walking, made of nothing but haze. Their steps made no prints, but the temperature dropped wherever they passed. Brandt ordered a fallback toward the vehicles, but the route was gone. The terrain had changed, landmarks rearranged as if rewritten. Every turn led them back to the center of camp. The engineer screamed that their GPS showed the same coordinates repeating infinitely. It wasn't malfunction. They were trapped inside a pocket of atmosphere folding back on itself, a loop of breathable prison. The air had become topography. Then came the whispering wind, except there was no wind. The air around them began to vibrate at speech frequencies, shaping words without needing sound. "You breathed us in," it said. The linguist fell to his knees, crying. "It's everywhere," he muttered. "It's in us now." And he was right. Every breath they took carried faint static, tiny vibrations that tickled the back of the throat. The air wasn't surrounding them anymore, it was occupying them. The medic tried to use oxygen tanks to filter it out, but the tanks ruptured instantly, imploding instead of exploding. The pressure outside them had inverted, collapsing inward, as though the air inside was being pulled from existence. The fog thickened, now pulsing faintly with light, red, blue, and white, mimicking emergency signals. It was copying human behavior, learning their symbols for panic. At 0117, the radios came back on, but none of them had touched the controls. Through the static came their own voices, whispering in sequence, calling roll like soldiers at attention. "Brandt," said the first. Then another voice, quieter, present. Each name was followed by an answer, all of them eerily calm, until they reached the last man, The linguist, whose voice replied with words no one had ever said, "We belong to the air." Moments later, the pressure dropped so fast their ears bled. Dust shot upward in spirals. The fog erupted into motion, swirling violently, forming an enormous translucent column above them. Inside the vortex, faces appeared. Human, distorted, mouths opening in unison without sound. The medics screamed and fired into the column. The bullets slowed, then reversed, suspended mid-air like insects trapped in amber. Then they fell straight down, embedding in the ground, smoking faintly. The linguist reached toward the vortex, as if hypnotized. His body began to distort, outlines shimmering like heat. When Brandt grabbed him, his arm passed through resistance, like pushing into water. For a second he felt the air vibrate around his bones. Then the linguist was gone. No flash, no scream, just gone, absorbed into the density like ink drawn into lungs. His voice echoed faintly through the fog. "It's breathing through me." By dawn, the fog had cleared. The air was still again unnaturally clean, carrying no trace of dust or scent. The survivors stood in stunned silence, realizing the pressure had normalized. The compasses aligned. Radios worked again. Everything looked the same, but sounded wrong. There was no echo, no resonance, not even the sound of their own breathing. The air wasn't gone. It was watching. Later, the recovery team found the site empty. No bodies, no vehicles, just gear scattered across smooth sand. Every recorder was blank, every signal dead. But when they played one damaged tape through a repaired system, they heard something faint, barely there. Not a voice, not a cry, but an inhale. Long, slow, familiar. It was the sound of the desert itself taking its first breath after a long, patient night. When the dust finally settled over that forgotten airbase, there was nothing left that looked alive. No movement, no sound, not even the faint trace of wind. But beneath the cracked concrete, something was still moving. Something that didn't belong to this world or the next. The operation files were wiped, the survivors scattered under new names, and the story buried so deep that even satellites were ordered to forget those coordinates. But silence has a strange way of remembering what it's supposed to erase. Whatever they uncovered down there wasn't built by men. It was inherited by them. The base wasn't an experiment. It was a warning. A cage meant to contain something that refused to die. Something that learned from every sound, every breath, every mistake. The military thought they sealed it again. They didn't realize that you can't contain something that's already inside the air. Years later, locals still report the same strange hum in the desert wind, a vibration that pulses like a heartbeat beneath the ground. Instruments fail there, compasses twist, and recordings return blank except for one thing: faint breathing. Slow, deep, patient, almost human. Almost. Maybe it's still down there, waiting for the world to forget again. Or maybe it already escaped the night it learned how to breathe through us. Because the truth is, some things aren't buried beneath the earth. They're buried inside time, waiting for someone foolish enough to dig them up. So if you ever hear the ground exhale beneath your feet, or feel the air thicken for no reason at all, don't run, don't speak, just hold your breath. Because what they found under that airbase still breathes, and it's listening for yours. End of file. Transmission status unknown.